I knew people weren't going to predict that the attack on the universities, but I knew that was going to be like one of the first things because it's fascism.
You study philosophy of language, the language of politics, and the language and strategies of fascism. And you've been outspoken about calling President Trump a fascist. Tell us why, and then explain how Trump compares to other fascists.
So I think of fascism as sort of based on great replacement theory. The idea is that the nation was great, and its greatness consisted of the exploits of its great men. And then the idea is that foreigners are coming in and destroying the nation's greatness. They're polluting the blood of the nation, as it were. And so great replacement theory is central here. And the mythic past is central, this idea of a past that was once great. That's kind of what you see that is what you see in India now, the idea that there was a pure mythic past. A pure Hindu past. So purity is very central here. We see purity entering into the description of immigration or foreigners or people regarded as other, and that there's some kind of pollution. And then we need to get back to rigid gender roles, according to fascism, because we need to repopulate the nation with the pure people of that race. Mm-hmm. So rigid gender roles are very central, and patriarchy is very central because the glorification of men's exploits in the past and women's equality threatens the primacy of men. And that's part of this great pure mythic past that is supposedly being destroyed by foreigners and liberal equality. Now, what we have in terms of ranking of fascists, I mean, it's pretty typical to say that Romania was particularly horrific. We have to distinguish the old right from the new right. So I would think if you're looking at Mussolini, you're looking at someone who himself, Ethiopia, he invaded Ethiopia. So that was something that in the black press, they focused on as a race war. So that was obviously a race war. But it wasn't the kind of efficient genocidal mania of Hitler. And Hitler, of course, focused on Jews as the sort of force behind feminism and liberalism. This is what people don't understand. Just a short pet peeve tangent. It wasn't Orthodox Jews that appear in Mein Kampf. Mm-hmm. It was Jews like me, like leftist pro-equality Jews. So Hitler focused on Jews. I think actually Netanyahu is right now showing himself to be a fascist along historically horrific dimensions. I think with Trump, with immigration, we're seeing concentration camps. We're seeing something very similar to the German Sturmabteilung. ICE looks very similar. It's Sturm of the SA. Hitler was like, okay, goons, here are your state uniforms. And so we're seeing something eerily similar to that move. And we're seeing concentration camps. But we didn't have the final solution in Germany until 1941. So really, my family was living in Germany in 1937 and 1938. It wasn't until Kristallnacht that things really got extremely extreme.
So he's just in the early stages of this, is what you're saying, correct? In the early stages of fascism.
I don't think you would say that Hitler in 1934 was in the early stages of fascism. He was a fascist. And I think that we're looking at a kind of 1934 kind of moment. It's tricky because, Trump is declaring emergencies left and right? So, it's the same strategies we're seeing. We can talk about whether these strategies are things he got from books or whether they're just natural reactions if you want to take over.
So your latest book is Erasing History, and there's been a lot of recent attempts by President Trump to do exactly that. Let's go through some of them, and we'll talk about where they fit with the standard fascist playbook, of which there is one. President Trump has placed Washington, D.C., as we noted, police force under federal control, deployed the National Guard, and ordered federal agents to patrol the city. You've written that, quote, fascist law and order rhetoric is explicitly meant to divide citizens into two classes, those of the chosen nation who are lawful by nature and those who are not, who are inherently lawless. So talk about how Trump's move fits into that framework. And he's using words like bloodthirsty and deranged maniacs, et cetera.
Right. So it's clearly, racial in character in the case of DC. It's part of here we need to bring in American history and not European history and look back to this idea of Black-run, Black majority cities during Reconstruction being described as corrupt. So that and lawless. This idea, this is a chapter I talk about in my book, How Fascism Works, called Sodom and Gomorrah. The idea is that cities are like the cities have, are filled with foreigners, immigrants, and the law and order has completely broken down, and they're filled with LGBTQ citizens doing decadent things. So this is the kind of structure, the rural-urban divide, that Trump leans into, and he leans into many Americans it's very natural. That's why Sodom and Gomorrah appears in the Bible. There's something about the rural-urban divide that speaks, geographically and centrally to humanity.
And how does the move fit into the framework? Why pick that just to pick DC to give you that idea? Because it's one he can control more easily, presumably, correct? Because it is a federal center as well as a city.
So DC, because of its historical associations, he can tell a fake story that draws on racism, that draws on America's sort of founding sin, genocide of indigenous people and racism. So that's what he's doing. And he's using it. All of these, what you do is you draw on stereotypes, you draw on myths about oppressed groups to basically create a sense of emergency and then take over. And that's what we're seeing.
So another one, Trump is meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska for what he calls a feel-out session. It's kind of creepy, over the war in Ukraine. Trump has repeatedly blamed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for starting the war, despite obvious evidence to the contrary. He's also blamed Putin recently. He's all over the place. Is the constant shuffling of blame a deliberate tactic, a fascist tactic to undermine truth, or is he just reacts, as he feels like it at any one moment?
That's a great question. I assume that's a question for both of us, Kara. I could throw it back at you and we could discuss it. I think neither of us really know. There is that 1984-esque kind of we've always been at war with Oceania thing going on. But, Orwell sets it up as if it's deliberate, whereas with Trump, one has more of a feeling that it's chaotic.
Does the muddling the narrative around Russia Ukraine give Trump any sort of strategic benefit, or is it just he doesn't know what he's doing? You're right, I can't tell. But has there ever been fascists that do this?
There seems to be more anarchy here. I guess this is one of the objections that it's not fascism people would make, that there's too much anarchy for it to be a coherent ideology. We're familiar with that point. But I think that Trump's supporters want him to want him to bring these wars to an end.
Right.
So even I'm going to speak for you because I assume that these people are in your orbit too. I knew intelligent people who thought Trump was going to bring the war in Gaza to an end and bring the war in Ukraine to an end and stop funding Israel with weapons to do its genocide and stop. I'm for weapons for Ukraine, and I am not for supporting Israel's war in Gaza. But I think there are people, his supporters, J.D. Vance, for instance, were people who were invested in him bringing these wars to a conclusion. So I see Trump, especially with Russia and Ukraine, I see him under a lot of pressure, internal pressure.
So I'm going to move on. The White House is going to review Smithsonian museums ahead of America's 250th anniversary to ensure they are, quote, accurate, patriotic, and enlightening. They've also announced that Trump will host the Kennedy Center's award show. Given everything else Trump's trying to accomplish, why would he want to micromanage museums and performing arts centers? It could be part of his ego, the need for control. Is this a fascist tactic, or are the two mixed up with each other?
Well, I published How Fascism Works in 2018, and other people as well were saying Trumpism is fascism. And one of the major objections was, where's the cultural element? So, fascism involves a takeover of culture and linking of culture to the greatness of the nation and an exceptionalist narrative. And it's exactly what we're seeing. In fact, this was the objection to calling it fascism, that he wasn't doing this. So now we see the kind of autocratic structure that of the White House, the gold leaf everywhere, the kind of Gaddafi-esque structure. Gaddafi wasn't a fascist, but obviously he was a despotic autocrat. So, and now we're seeing the kind of cultural takeover in the service of the greatness of the nation and the greatness of its leader that we would expect if this were fascism.
Along with the media, correct? Along with suing the media.
Yeah, I mean, there's the super obvious stuff, like shutting down the media, shutting down the universities, changing the school system. I mean, a lot of people didn't see that as much, which is why I wrote Erasing History, because I knew people weren't going to predict that the attack on the universities, but I knew that was going to be like one of the first things. Yeah, so because it's fascism. Education is central. Museums, cultural production, the culture and education are central here. And so you have to take over the education system. You have to take over the museums, because the museums are part of the education system. And they're not even hiding what they want to replace it with. They want to replace it with an American exceptionalist narrative. That's what they say. And it's so ironic, right? Because the American exceptionalist narrative is that the United States is a free country, a free democracy. And at the very same time as they're showing us not to be exceptional at all, they're imposing an American exceptionalist narrative by law.